Hi, everybody. This is Alan Fine. I'm in Northern Ireland. We are following the roots of Halloween and Samhain. But when you send your clients to this area, there's so much to do as you're waiting to trick or treat and haunt the evenings. We're here in the daytime learning about the history.
My name is Michael Cooper. I'm the Strategic Director of the new Peacemakers Museum here in the Bogside in Derry.
So just a short walk from the walled city, we came down here, and now we are in the midst of a retelling of the latter half of the struggle. So you were saying that there are other facilities we can go to before this to explain that, and then we'll pick up from here.
Absolutely. So we have the Museum of Free Derry, just a few minutes walk from here, which really tells the origins of the conflict, going right back to the colonial history here, the British colonising the North 400 years ago, the partition of Ireland 100 years ago, creation of the new Northern State, and the discrimination that applied in the state against both the Irish minority and against actually the working class British population as well. That leads to the conflict breaking out in the late 1960s, and from there we move on to a very violent period. Bloody Sunday is the best example of that. So the Museum of Free Derry really covers that origins of the conflict and how we get to the point of really after Bloody Sunday, where the British Army then decided to remove the barricades that surrounded this area. This was known as Free Derry. It was a no-go area against the British forces. And the Museum of Free Derry really ends at that point, July 1972, and that's where we pick up the story from there.
And so then you met us at the door and said, okay, start going. And there's so much great material here. We barely entered the museum when you came out and said, okay, we're going to talk now. So I want to talk about what we will see as we continue. Tell us, please.
Well, effectively, we begin 1st of August 1972. British Army have arrived in the area, removed the barricades. IRA knew they couldn't stop that. There was no resistance offered. But effectively, from that point, it was no longer a no-go area. British Army are on the streets. It changes the nature of the conflict, changes tactics. But the whole way through, and this is the way we designed this in sort of 5-year chunks, 5-year periods, the whole way through the rest of the 70s into the 80s, there were various attempts to resolve the conflict politically. We had 3 key figures from this area. Mark McGuinness, who was an IRA leader in the early days of the conflict. John Hume, who was opposed to the IRA campaign but supported Irish reunification as well and the removal of the British connection. And also Mitchell McLaughlin, another well-known Sinn Féin figure here in the area.
So when you say no-go, you're talking about residents are living in Derry, life is going on, and they're protecting the area. It's a no-go for anyone else. And suddenly, that's torn down, and life is upside down.
Well, not as simple as that, because during the no-go period, the IRA controlled access to the area. Initially, the barricades were vigilante barricades, but the IRA eventually ended up manning the barricades. So if the British Army or RUC, the old police force, tried to raid the area, look for suspects, find weapons, there would have been resistance to that, and effectively that ended with the invasion. So life was still going on.
There's no resistance now, and they were now searching homes and doing that.
They were on the streets. There was no opportunity for the IRA to use this area as a sort of safe haven, if you like, in the same way that they would have done up until that point. So life went on before the barricades were removed and afterwards. So it was a very surreal situation. You could have lived a sort of fairly normal life in some ways, but the conflict was always one step ahead.
And we're showing the videos that as we speak, so they could see what a strange life that would be.
Absolutely, a strange juxtaposition. You're walking to the shop, you're going to buy your loaf of bread, you're walking to school, but then a sniper attack might take place. British Army might appear, set up a checkpoint on the streets, and then after half an hour, that moves on, and you're back to normality. So it was a surreal experience for a lot of people.
As we move around the museum, you said on the left was historical context, on the right was what it was really like for the people?
Yes, effectively we have these chronological periods explaining the political initiatives, the 3 key figures I mentioned, female activists, what they were trying to do to resolve the conflict, images of what was going on at ground level, biographies of the 3 key figures we mentioned as well. But then we have these installations that sort of show unique aspects. So, showing the inside of a house from the 70s, which looks like normal life is going on, but upstairs you have a meeting of young IRA members discussing their future plans. Down below, underneath the floorboards, people are hiding weapons, and they're moved about every day to avoid British Army finding those devices and weapons. So you have that sort of juxtaposition there. You'll see a big, massive installation of the Roswell Flats, iconic flats that were in the area. The Bloody Sunday killings happened in their vicinity, and you'll see footage of riots going on while people are walking to the shops.
So I haven't seen a lot of the museum, but I was impressed. There were the rubber bullets that were shot at people. We'll show them. It's about that big. How did it not? Well, obviously, I think it killed one child. What?
Well, rubber bullets killed 3 and plastic bullets replaced them. They killed 14 across the north, not specifically Derry. One young man was killed in Derry by a rubber bullet. An 11-year-old in West Belfast, a young man in Strabane. Plastic bullets replaced them. Supposed to be safer. Again, fired at high speeds, quite often off the ground. So he would hit people bouncing up on the head, in the chest, and the eyes. They killed 14, including an 11-year-old boy here in the Bogside in 1982, and a 45-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy as well. I've seen people losing eye sockets with them, severe chest injuries. They're lethal weapons, but that's what you faced here right throughout the conflict.
We're spending too much time on the little area that I've seen so far. The other areas, can you just give us a little overview, please?
Well, effectively, we're trying to explain how we moved from a violent situation and violent tactics only in the 70s into the 1980s, where people were actually thinking about, is there a political route out of this? The hunger strikes in 1981 is a key feature. We have a replica H-block cell from the hunger strikes, which prisoners were campaigning to restore political status, prisoner of war status. And they eventually won that campaign. 10 men died in the process. It gave the IRA more support. But one of the hunger strikers, Bobby Sands, was elected as a member of Parliament during that protest. And that convinced the IRA, well, why don't we use elections as well as another front, another tactic? So as you move into the 80s, you've got Sinn Féin emerging as the sort of political party representing the IRA's aspirations. John Hume is still doing his thing politically, opposing the IRA, but again, trying to search for a route where reunification is possible, but more long-term, involving unionism and accommodation with them. And in the late 80s, Hume and Adams, Gerry Adams, the Sinn Féin president, Mark McGuinness, John Hume, start holding secret discussions which become public knowledge, trying to find an agreed position between their parties. Could the British offer offer an opportunity for reunification through a democratic process? And that is effectively the Good Friday Agreement. It meant the North would stay in the UK for a bit longer, but the system of government would be based on equality of treatment and power sharing, but also a referendum. A border poll would be built into that agreement, where at the right time, if a majority of people favoured breaking the link with Britain in the North, the British would hold a referendum and would accept the result. And that is now the roadmap. We're talking 10 to 15 years we expect that will happen.
It must have been as surreal as the occupation. It must have been as surreal to finally start to see it go the other way.
Absolutely. I mean, this town, because it was on the border as well, every main road out of the city went on the 26 counties, or officially the Republic of Ireland. Border checkpoints, British Army search bays, all of that. People experienced long delays going to and fro. This area specifically, surrounded by observation posts, British Army bases up on the city walls. An observation post looked into my bedroom window, and you think, oh, that's all crazy stuff. We were used to that. You know, we knew Big Brother was always there, and you still try to live a normal life. When that all disappeared gradually, it was actually strange to get used to that, because you could almost, you think it's too much freedom. You're expecting to be stopped and all of that, and that doesn't happen anymore. And that was a bit of getting used to, especially families who were more directly involved in the conflict, shall we say, who were used to house raids and things like that. When that ended, in particular, you know, the average person who maybe wasn't involved directly mightn't have noticed a major difference. But if you were directly involved, and all of a sudden that's not happening anymore, that was a big change for the good, obviously.
Anything else you want to tell us about those other sections? And because I'll show whatever you think I should highlight.
Absolutely. So we have a replica of Freed Area Wall, which is a very iconic monument. It sits right in the middle of this area. It basically says, "You're now entering Freed Area." Slogan first painted in 1969 when the first barricades were built around this area against the police, against the old state police force. So that slogan on the wall was repainted, much larger font, later in 69, and it's still there. The wall was retained. All the old slum houses it was attached to were removed in the 70s, but people said, we want to keep the wall. It was no longer a no-go area, but for people here, this was still Freed Area. So that wall is still seen as a symbol of free speech, a symbol of resistance. It's used for different slogans, different sort of international campaigns, and there's a replica you'll find in here, and letters actually, inside the letters, it shows the images of the wall over the years. So it's a very unique installation. Replica British Army observation posts you'll find. There's a real actual British Army Sanger out in the grounds, which was taken from an army base across the river, which has been decommissioned, so you can actually photograph that outside. And all sorts of unique artifacts. So we have a listening device came out of the home of a senior Republican called Jerry Kelly. It was actually in his roof space with a battery pack, so that the British Army could listen to his conversations. But if he'd wired it to his mains electricity supply, he would have noticed his electricity bill going up. So they put the batteries on instead, so he wouldn't notice. So it lasted a few weeks, obviously, and then the batteries would have drained, but they were listening to conversations because he and other senior Republican leaders, the British obviously wanted to know what their intentions were, what their view was and how things were moving during the peace process. So he's actually donated a listening device, but loads of other artefacts and archived documents from the negotiation, private and public.
This museum opened when, and what's the future for the museum?
Well, we only opened in July this year, so we've only been up and running for the last 3 or 4 months. The Museum of Free Derry down the street attracts over 40,000 visitors a year. It's the most popular independent museum in the north, and we obviously follow on in terms of their chronology. So even if we only get half of their visitor numbers per year, we'll be very happy. It will be a very successful result, and we already are seeing the groups.
I hope they're referring people over here.
They already are, and we have joint tickets with the Museum of Free Derry, a lot of joint market and things like that. And we're linked into the wider sort of heritage network here. All the main museums in the city, we all cooperate with each other. They sort of push footfall in all directions. So we're very confident, even looking at projections for next year and advanced bookings, we know this will be a success. And it was needed because that was a gap in the story, and that's why we said, look, we need to tell the rest of the story. Hunger strikes, obviously a key event. A lot of Irish Americans will remember the strikes. But the whole involvement of the Americans in the peace process as well. You'll see Bill Clinton on a visit to Derry in 1995. He visited numerous times, still comes. And that was his first visit. Headline of the local newspaper, "Welcome, Mr. President." And his pressure on the British government to ensure there would be a proper negotiation once the IRA called a ceasefire, that was absolutely key. No, from the Sinn Féin perspective and John Hume's perspective, having international backing for this process was absolutely vital, because the Republican view was we can't do this on our own. We can't trust the British government to deliver in terms of negotiations. We need an international guarantor. Clinton became the guarantor. George Mitchell chaired the peace talks, and every American president since has been encouraged to maintain that support. So the Irish American and American administration support has been absolutely vital.
It's a lot to absorb, and I'm glad that I can spend a number of hours here. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you very much, Alan. I mean, we're very encouraged by the response so far. You will need a couple of hours to do this properly, but the way it's designed, you can come through here sort of scared through it in an hour, get the gist of the story. And the gist of the story is effectively there's now a roadmap to Irish reunification through peaceful means. It's taken decades to get to that point, but we needed to tell that story. And for the visitor coming here who maybe got that impression on the television, this was all Protestant fighting Catholics, some sort of religious spat, that wasn't the story at all from our perspective. The main argument was the British colonial legacy and trying to deal with that, and that led to the partition of the country 100 years ago. What we have now is a roadmap to end that link, but do it through peaceful tactics, and effectively then an all-Ireland state where everybody will be treated equally, and that's the important thing.
Decades of history, a couple of hours. It's amazing that you were able to put it together. Thank you very much. And this is Alan Fine for Insider Travel Report.